So we've been reading this book of Ecclesiastes, and we actually started back in the summer, at the end of summer. So we started this at the end of summer. It's now been half a year. So I understand that some of the things are kind of not as fresh on your memory. Ecclesiastes was written by Solomon, and Solomon, at the end of his life when he wrote this book, he started to have some very negative opinions about things. He's writing this book from the perspective of someone who's not really looking at things through a biblical lens or through a godly lens. He's looking at things through a very human perspective. And so he gets a lot wrong. But we're going to use his perspective of what he gets wrong to see kind of what the truth is and figure out the truth that's behind it. And so Ecclesiastes is a weird book of the Bible. And today we're going to start off, we're going to look at 2 chapters of it, 9 and 10. And then we'll only have one more week of studying Ecclesiastes where we'll look at the last 2 chapters, 11 and 12. So chapters 9 and 10, they're very different chapters. They're on completely different subjects. So what we're going to talk about today to kick us off, though, is what I call the last enemy that shall be destroyed. Let me start off with a question. What is the one thing that all people everywhere have in common? Okay, well, that's true that Jesus died for them. It's not exactly what I was looking for. Let's actually say something that all people have in common before Jesus was even alive. What is something that was true for all people? Death, though, is the answer. Death is the one thing that is to visit every single person. And I really do hope and believe that the rapture will happen soon and that it'll be in our lifetimes and that we don't have to experience death because we would go in the rapture. And that would be my hope, and what I would just that would be what I hope would be the case. But we also have to prepare ourselves for the reality that it might not be in our lifetime and that we might actually get old someday. And people will ask you about, when was SpongeBob not in 3D? You know, they'll ask questions like that. So what I'm saying is we actually do need to think about the concept of death. It feels weird to teach about death to people as young as you. But that's what we're going to talk about today because that's what's here in Ecclesiastes. So it's kind of strange, but it is the common fate of every man if we don't go in the rapture. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm not doing it to be depressing. I want to talk about how to defeat death. There is a way that we can defeat death's power in our lives. So Ecclesiastes chapter 9. Oh, you know what? You should have grabbed a Bible already, but if you didn't, go grab yourself one and turn to Ecclesiastes 9. For I considered all this in my heart so that I could declare it to all, that the righteous and the wise in their works are in the hand of God. People know neither love nor hatred by anything they see before them. All things come alike to all. One event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good, the clean, and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As is the good, so is the sinner. He who takes an oath, as he who fears an oath. There's an evil that is done under the sun, that one thing that happens to all. And we talked about what that was. It's death. It's the one thing, if you don't go in the rapture, it's the one thing that will happen to you no matter what. Everyone has this same common destiny. No matter how old you live to be, no matter how much you try to outrun it, it'll happen. Woody Allen, I think he made movies or something. He said, "I'm not afraid to die. I just don't want to be there when it happens."
Do we write that down?
You don't have to write that down. It's just a quote from him. And you know what? We kind of all feel that way. Well, maybe some of us don't want to die, but he says, "I'm not afraid to die. It's just something that I don't want to be present for." We don't want to think about that happening to us, to our person. But you know what? It will happen. If the rapture never comes in our lifetime, it will happen. It's something we have to think about. Solomon writes, "Truly the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil. Madness is in their hearts while they live, and after that they go to the dead. But for him who is joined to all the living there is hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion." He says, if you're alive, no matter what you are, you're at least better than something that's dead, no matter how great it is. That's what Solomon's perspective is right here. Benjamin Franklin also had a quote where he said in 1789, he said, "Our new Constitution is now established and has an appearance that promises permanency. But in this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes." You've probably heard that before, that phrase. The only two things you can count on in life for sure are death and taxes. And Ben Franklin was one of the people who said that. Remember, Solomon's writing this stuff, and he's coming at it from a kind of a non-biblical perspective. So some of these things that he says are not very spiritual. They're not thinking about the afterlife. Like, we know that when someone dies, they have a destiny of going to heaven or hell. But when Solomon's writing this stuff, he's not thinking about that. He's just thinking in worldly terms. So he says in verse 5, "For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no more reward, and the memory of them is forgotten." Solomon is saying, from what he sees, when people die, that's just it. There's nothing else for them, nothing to look forward to. Now, is that true in light of the rest of the Bible? No. Because what does the Bible say?
It says that you'll die and you'll go to heaven or you'll go to hell.
Yeah, so people who are saved and would go to be in heaven, they would have a lot to look forward to.
Yeah.
But Solomon's not thinking about those things. He's kind of almost being like an atheist here. An atheist would say they don't believe in God or the afterlife, so they would say when someone dies, poof, they're just gone. They don't matter anymore. They'll never think about anything again. They don't have a soul. They think that this life is all that there is. Or someone who's a Jehovah's Witness, if you've ever heard of them. A Jehovah's Witness is someone who, they read Ecclesiastes a lot differently than we do. When they read Ecclesiastes, they take everything in it as literally true. So they don't understand that Solomon's kind of writing this stuff from an unbiblical perspective. And a Jehovah's Witness reads that verse that the dead know nothing. They believe that when someone dies, that they just stay asleep in their grave, and that they don't come out of their grave, they just sleep there. And so they call it soul sleep. Even some Christians believe in that. Jehovah's Witnesses believe in this soul sleep thing. That's not what's true biblically. In the Bible, when you die, you immediately go to heaven or you go to hell. There's no sleeping in your grave or something like that. So the reason this stuff is important to get right, if you have a wrong view of the afterlife, it can actually make people live wrong in this life. When you have a wrong view of the afterlife, it can make you live wrong in this life. Like, for example, the Muslims, they believe that there's one surefire way to get to heaven. They believe there's one thing that they can do that will get them into heaven no matter what. What is it? What a Muslim believes is that the way that they can for sure get to heaven is by killing themselves at the same time as killing other people. The people in 9/11, the people who flew the airplanes into the towers, they believed that the one way they could be for sure to get to heaven is if they do this terrible act and kill all these people. That'll get them right into heaven, is what they believe. Yeah, they are completely wrong about that, and I'm sure they figured that out immediately upon death. But you know what? That is what they believed. When you have the wrong view of the afterlife, it can make you live wrong in this life. Those 9/11 terrorists, when they went into the hotel rooms of the places where these men had stayed, they had bottles of alcohol everywhere. They were getting drunk every night and just partying, doing all kinds of terrible things. They'd had prostitutes in their hotel room. They had dirty movies on TV. Now, Muslims are the type of people that they will not even touch a bottle of alcohol. They think it is, to them, it's a sin if you even touch the bottle of alcohol. They won't even be in the same vehicle that alcohol is being transported in. So how come whenever they went into these 9/11 terrorist hotel rooms that they'd stayed in, why did they have empty alcohol bottles everywhere? Because they thought, well, I'm going to heaven for killing all these people, so it doesn't matter how I live. I'm just going to party, I'm going to do all this evil stuff, and then whenever I die, I'll just go to heaven anyway. So they thought they could just do whatever they want and get away with it. When someone has the wrong view of the afterlife, it will make them live wrong in this life. So, if you think there's no point to doing good stuff anymore, a lot of times people won't do good stuff. Look at verse 6. Solomon writes, "Also their love, their hatred, and their envy have now perished. Never more will they have a share in anything done under the sun. Eat your bread with joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already accepted your works. Let your garments always be white. Let your head lack no oil. Live joyfully with the wife whom you love, all the days of your vain life which he's given you under the sun. All your days of vanity, for that is your portion in life, and in the labor which you perform under the sun." Solomon says, so you know what? If your life doesn't matter once you die, just live it up, party hard, dress extravagantly, Enjoy life while you can. Enjoy being married while you can. And Solomon wrote all this stuff towards the end of his life when he just had a very negative perspective on what life meant. So, a great reminder here, though. He didn't say, rejoice in the wives of your youth. He said, rejoice in the wife of your youth. Because one thing he did learn, if you know anything about Solomon, he had a lot of wives. Yeah, he married like 700 women.
Yeah, he had 700 wives.
So he learned that that was probably not a very good way to have a marriage. And when he writes actually in this book, he doesn't say rejoice in the wives of your youth. He says rejoice in the wife of your youth. And the wisdom books in the Bible actually do say that a lot, to be happy with the wife of your youth. Or if you're a girl, it'd be your husband. But you know what? That really does go for all people, to enjoy who you are married to. And that's why you want to take seriously, when you get married someday, who that person is going to be. The other day I was reading this marriage book, and I think Jacob or Haley said, why are you reading that marriage book? And I said, well, so I can learn to be a better husband.
It was me.
And Emily was in the other room, and she says, you don't need to read a book for that. I give you advice on that every day. Can just anybody enjoy the wife of their youth or the husband of their youth? Can just anybody enjoy that person? Sometimes no. Sometimes people marry someone who's a really bad decision for them to marry. Sometimes people marry someone who's a really not good husband or wife. And so they don't take the time to marry the right person, and they have a very unhappy life. Take a lot of time. That's all I'm saying. Whenever you go to marry someone someday, take a lot of time. Don't make it an easy or quick decision, because then you'll read verses like this, and it'll just be depressing to read verses like this. I don't want to depress you guys today. So let's go back to talking about death. Verse 10. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might, for there is no work or device or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you are going. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, nor favor to men of skill. But time and chance happen to them all. For man does not know his time, like a fish taken in a cruel net, like birds caught in a snare. So the sons of men are snared in an evil time, when it suddenly falls upon them. So death's going to come to anyone. You don't know when. Some are going to die young, some are going to die old, some rich, some poor. But you know what? It's actually going to happen to everybody. Now, some people do everything that they can to avoid death. It's an instinct that lots and lots of us have. We'll do everything we can to avoid death. It's one of our instincts. Like that lizard. It's one of our instincts. So, Solomon's saying here from his secular worldview, his non-biblical worldview, since you'll die and you'll never feel or enjoy anything again, just live it up, enjoy where you are right now. And you know what? If you have a philosophy on life that it doesn't matter how you live, then it will make your life feel meaningless. It will make you actually misbehave a lot and do a lot of evil things, because you'll think that it just doesn't matter anymore. It's a wrong belief system. When people do that, they're surrendering to death. That's actually what they're doing. They're surrendering to death. I'm going to show you guys 3 ways to defeat death. The 9/11 terrorists were people who surrendered to death because they thought, you know what, let's just give up on any type of righteous living because we're going to die. Our actions aren't going to matter anymore. So they thought, let's just give up on trying to live righteously anymore. They surrendered to death there. But as Christians, we don't believe that our actions don't matter. We do believe that our actions actually matter for eternity. So we know that whenever we die, we don't just stop existing. Our souls are going to go on forever. Here's how you defeat death. Number 1, do not live as if this life is the end. Because we know it's not. We know that whenever we do good works, that God's going to reward us for it in heaven. Not only that, but don't live as if this life is the end. We know it's not. We know that when we do good works, God will reward us for it in heaven. Whenever we know that this life is not the end, when we know that this world, the way that it is right now, it's not where we're going to spend eternity. I know to some people it can make them think, well, who cares what happens on this world? But actually, it causes people to want to make the best difference they can in this world. It makes people want to do a lot of good things for this world. We want to leave something good behind us whenever we die. We don't want to be the type of people who, someday you die and people go to your funeral and then 3 or 4 months later, no one ever even talks about you again. Nobody even remembers you anymore. That would mean that you just made no difference in the world. Nobody even cared about your existence. You guys know Brother Orville, who goes here to the church? Does anybody know him? Orville, what's his last name? Garrison, yeah, that's it. Okay. Yeah, he used to be a pastor, and actually something that he spent a lot of time doing, I guess maybe one of his specialties as a pastor, he preached funerals. And he told me one time that he preached funerals for people, and the funeral home would call him, and they'd say, hey, we have this body here, we know who he is and everything, but nobody wants to pay for a funeral. Nobody wants to do a service for him or anything. No one even really cares that he died. And they'd call Orville and they'd say, would you just come say a few words for him? And so Orville said, he preached funerals before where the only person there was the funeral director. I guess they would take in the body, they would just put it in the ground somewhere cheaply and, give their body somewhere to lay. But, he said he would go do funerals, or he'd go stand by someone's grave, say a few words, someone he didn't know.
That's sad.
But nobody came to this person who cared about them. So we don't want to have that kind of life where we would go into the ground and nobody would ever care that we were gone anymore, that we never really made a difference in the world. What I want you to think about is that we only get a short period of time on this planet to make a difference. We're just here for a whisper. And then we're in eternity for forever. You can die and go to heaven and be there forever, but you only get one short window of time to make a difference on this earth while we're here. C.S. Lewis had this quote. He said, if you read history, you will find that the Christians who did the most for the present world were precisely those who thought the most of the next. And he was thinking of people like William Wilberforce, who was a Christian, who knew he'd only be in this world for, a few decades, and then he'd go into heaven for forever. But he decided he wanted to end slavery. And he did that it was England or wherever he lived in Europe. It was England or France or something. He ended slavery there in his life. He said, I'm going to devote my life to ending slavery because I know I'm only going to be in this world for a short period of time, and then I'll just be in heaven forever. And he had a right view of the afterlife, so he didn't say, so I'm just going to say, screw this world, I'll just go to heaven someday. That's not what he did. He doesn't say that. He says, I'm going to do what I can to make this world a better place in the short period of time that I'm here. So that's what William Wilberforce did. Okay, number 2, another way to live, another way to defeat death is to live without regrets. Very easy, just 3 words there. Live without regrets. That last verse we read said that death comes on us like fish taken in a cruel net, or like birds caught in a snare. It means death comes on people before they are ready. It just happens. It can catch them by surprise. So what we have to remember is, I don't think anyone in this room is going to die anytime soon. Always do the things that you want to do. Accomplish the things that you want to accomplish. Yeah, someone could have a car accident and die. And none of us are indestructible. It could happen to any of us. So something to always remember, which again, this is weird to say to young people, but live without regrets. Even when you think about how when you get to the end of the school year, when you get to the end of 8th grade, don't look back and say, man, I wish I had done this or that while I was at school. Now I'm never going to get a chance to do that again. I'll have to go to high school now. I'll never get a chance to do this at this school again. You'll have regrets. When you get to the end of high school, don't look back and say, oh, I wish I had done this or that while I was in high school. That's having regrets. And I hate that feeling of regret. Don't you hate that feeling of you wish you had done something somewhere, but you don't get the chance to do that anymore? Regret stinks. I try to look back when I think, someday when I'm not a youth pastor anymore, I don't want to look back at the times that I was a youth pastor and think, man, I wish I had done this, or I wish I had done that, or not done this, or not done that, because regrets are terrible. So try to live without having regrets. Do the things while you have a chance to do them. When I used to live with my mom and dad, when I look back at that time, one regret that I have is that I wasn't thankful enough to them, that I didn't appreciate them enough. So that's like a regret that I have a lot of times. I wish I'd been more thankful toward them while I was there. Christians have this expression. We'll say, if Jesus tarries, and they mean if Jesus tarries, it means if Jesus lets me stay on this earth this much longer, these are the things I want to do. This is the stuff I'm going to do someday if Jesus doesn't come back. If Jesus tarries, we'll find ourselves an old man or an old woman someday. And we don't want to be just full of regrets at that time. I don't want you guys to have that. Don't live with regrets. Don't think about what you did with your life and wish you had done something different. Do those things while you have a chance. Number 3, to defeat death, remember that death has already been defeated. If you've accepted the sacrifice of Jesus and you're on your way to heaven, death cannot touch you. I'm going to read you a verse from 1 Corinthians, chapter 15. It says, "So when this corruptible has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your sting? O Hades, where is your victory? The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." Jesus overcame death itself. That means that if we ever do go to die, it's not something that we have to be afraid of. If we ever die, it says there, death has lost its sting, which means that if you ever do die, it's not something that you actually have to be afraid of. It just means that you go into the arms of Jesus. It just means that you go right to be with God. So it's not something that's actually there to scare us. If you're a Christian, if you're not a Christian, then you have lots of things to be afraid of about dying. But if you are a Christian, there's nothing to be afraid of. It's not going to be anything that's like worse than what you've been through on earth. It's only going to be better. So if you have God, death is just like a doorway to heaven. There's nothing to be scared of on the other side. Jesus overcame death already. He said it's nothing to be afraid of. So don't fear death. I'd say only fear regret. You don't have to write this down, but a quote I heard one time, live every day as if it's your last. Someday you'll be right. And I just always remember that quote. You don't have to write it down, though. Let me tell you about what is death. I'm going to tell you 3 things that death is to make sure we have the right understanding of it. What is death? Well, death is separation. Write those 3 sentences up there. Write these 3 things down. Death is separation. This is how the Bible identifies what death is, or this is how the Bible describes death to us. Death is separation. So the first death is separation of the soul and body. If someone mentioned a car wreck a few minutes ago, you get in a car wreck and die, you will experience a separation right then. That is your soul leaving your body. When someone dies, their soul is separated from their body. Also in the Bible, you read about something called the second death. And I'll read those verses where that's talked about in a second. But the second death is separation of the soul and God. The second death is separation of the soul and God. So the first time someone dies, they're separated from their body. And then when they stand before God at the judgment seat, they'll have, if they're not saved, they will experience a separation from God. And that means going to hell. That's called the second death in the Bible. I'll read you what it says about it. It's in Revelation chapter 20, and it starts at verse 11. It's up there on the board. And it said, "Then I saw a great white throne, and him who sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away. There was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before God, and books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their works by the things which were written in the books. The sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death and Hades delivered up the dead who were in them. And they were judged, each one according to his works. Then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And anyone not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire." So if you're a Christian, and these are some scary verses here, when it talks about lakes of fire and being separated from God forever, that's some scary stuff right there to take seriously. If you're a Christian, you don't have to fear the second death. You might have to face the first, the separation of soul and body. The Bible does say it's appointed unto man once to die. We all have an appointment with death. There's a date. If Jesus tarries, if there's no rapture in our lifetime, God might have already got it appointment written in heaven. Says this is the date. Luke Taylor, March 25th to some certain date. I don't know when it is. Only God knows. So that could be an appointment that I have. It's appointed unto man once to die. We might have to face the first death, the first separation. But if you're saved from the second separation. You'll never have the separation from God. Chapter 10. Let's go to chapter 10 in Ecclesiastes, which actually chapter 10 starts at the end of chapter 9, in verse 13.
You don't say.
Yeah. Chapter 9, verse 13. There's actually a little section there that introduces chapter 10. So let's move on to that. Ecclesiastes 9:13. He tells a little story here at the end of chapter 9. This wisdom I have also seen under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it. He besieged it and built up great snares around it, and there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one remembered the same poor man. Then I said, wisdom is better than strength. Nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. Words of the wise spoken quietly should be heard, rather than the shout of a ruler of fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. Okay, what Solomon's saying here, to be wise and poor is better than to be rich and foolish. Solomon says to be wise and poor is better to be rich and foolish. But who are most people more likely to listen to? A poor man or a rich man?
A rich man.
Yeah.
Because
Why?
they'll bribe him.
Because they think, hey, I want to be close to this guy. He's got money. And they think, there's an idea in our society that if you're a rich person, then you must be really, really smart. And you must just be right about everything. People don't always think clearly, especially about money. And they think rich people just must be smarter because they have more money. If you look at just about any boardroom of any business, the boardroom is always rich people. It's always got like a bunch of men in suits, and they're seen as very intelligent and valuable to the companies because they have all this money. And even churches are like that sometimes. There's some churches, everyone who's a board member at the church is just the richest people of the church. That happens at churches sometimes too. Chapter 10. Dead flies putrefy the perfumer's ointment and cause it to give off a foul odor. So does a little folly to one respected for wisdom and honor. Imagine that you bought like a new perfume or a new cologne, and you take off the lid, and there's a dead fly in it.
It's probably like, don't drink it because it'll kill you.
Okay, well, you don't drink it even if it doesn't have a dead fly in it. But you know what? If you did that, if you open it up and there's a dead fly in it, you're probably not going to use that perfume then, right?
Yeah, cologne.
Or cologne. Yeah.
Good Lord.
Some people might. You know what? If you used it, that's the missing ingredient, the key ingredient. No one's going to smell you and think, whoa, you smell like a dead fly. It doesn't really have a smell. No one's ever going to smell the dead fly on you. But you're probably just not going to use it because that's just gross to have a dead fly in the ointment. So Solomon's saying here, that's like when you're a wise person and you do foolish things sometimes. It's like a fly in the ointment. It means that, you might be a really great wise person or a good person, but when you do dumb things, it can kind of discredit you as a person. It can like ruin your reputation or can even be disastrous for you. Hezekiah is a great example. He was a king of Israel. So many good things were said about him. He did a lot of great stuff, accomplished a lot. God said that he was one of the good kings. He did well in the eyes of the Lord. And yet Hezekiah, he brought some men from Babylon came to visit him one time. And Hezekiah was like, well, hey guys, let me show you my temple. We built this temple for God one time. Let me show you all the cool stuff inside. And he showed the Babylonian men all the stuff inside the temple, the gold and the silver and all the fancy things. Well, those men went back home. And then years later, the Babylonians start saying, hey, we went inside this temple in Jerusalem one time. Hezekiah showed us all this cool stuff they have in there, gold and silver. And they went down and took it all.
Stole it?
Yeah, killed a bunch of the people in Hezekiah's city and stole all the stuff from the temple. So he shouldn't have showed it to them. It was not wise. He was a great person, a great king, but he had that one big bummer that kind of made all the good stuff he did not even matter. Okay, verse 2. A wise man's heart is at his right hand, and a fool's is at his left. Even when a fool walks along the way, he lacks wisdom, and he shows everyone that he is a fool. When the Bible says there, he shows everyone that he is a fool, it's kind of translated strange. What it's saying right there is that this foolish man, when he goes along, he says to everyone, you're a fool, you're a fool, you're a fool. He's one of those people who goes around and he just calls everyone else a fool, even though he's actually a fool himself. And you kind of meet people like that sometimes. People will say, everyone's an idiot. Oh, I hate everybody. People are always stupid. Do you ever hear someone say that? Like they just think everyone in the world is a moron, except for themselves. But they think everyone else is dumb. Have you ever met someone who thinks things like that?
Yeah.
Or says things like that? Well, the Bible here says, when you're one of the people who says that, you're the fool.
Thank you, darling.
Why would anybody ever eat anything besides breakfast food?
People are idiots, Leslie.
When you're one of those people who always says, oh, he's an idiot. Oh, she's a moron. The Bible actually says you're a fool whenever you say that. So, 3 ways to identify a fool. So number 1, ways to identify a fool, they call everyone else a fool. Verse 4, Solomon writes, if the spirit of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your post, for conciliation pacifies great offenses. There is an evil I have seen under the sun, as an arrow proceeding from every ruler. Folly is set in great dignity, while the rich sit in a lowly place. I have seen servants on horses, while princes walk around on the ground like servants. He who digs a pit will fall into it, and whoever breaks through a wall will be bitten by a serpent. He who quarries stones may be hurt by them, and he who splits wood may be endangered by it. The second thing that a fool is always trying to do, the fool is always trying to trap other people. And God talks about this a lot in the Bible. When people are always trying to trap others and set traps for others, they will fall into their own traps. The Bible says that again and again and again. I don't think God's talking about literal traps that people set, like booby traps, like Home Alone.
Yeah.
I don't think he's talking about those kind of traps. He's talking about those people who are just always trying to trick others. Or they're people who's always trying to say gotcha all the time. Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. God doesn't like that. He's not very fond of that. People who are always just trying to pull the feet out from underneath someone else. I'm not talking about like practical jokes. But, you actually see this a lot with reporters in the news. They just always take some little story and they will just try to like stretch it into some big thing when it's really not. I know I'm going to get Emery fired up by saying this. But I saw this news article a few weeks back, and it was like the first week that Trump was even the president. In the first week, and someone writes a article about Trump on like CNN, and they say, what was it? They say, here's all the campaign promises that Donald Trump hasn't fulfilled yet. And I'm like, dude, he's been president for like less than a week, and you're complaining about he hasn't fulfilled campaign promises. 2 days later, they run a headline. The Trump administration seems obsessed with fulfilling all his campaign promises as fast as possible. One day they're saying he's not doing any of it. 2 days later, they say he's obsessed with doing it completely. And all I'm saying is they just make...
Tell him to get alive.
They need to get alive because they're making a bunch of hullabaloo about nothing. It's just a bunch of baloney. So really, these people who are always trying to set traps for others and play gotcha, God is not very fond of that, and you see it a lot in the Bible. Verse 10, if the axe is dual and the one does not sharpen the edge, then he must use more strength, but wisdom brings success. Wise people will keep trying and trying and trying something until they're successful. Fools give up quickly when it's hard. And so that's the last one there. Fools give up quickly when it's hard. A wise person will try, like every possible strategy they can before giving up at a difficult task. But fools will give up quickly when it's hard. Verse 11, I'm going to start reading, and you can keep writing there if you're not done writing. A serpent may bite when it's not charmed. The babbler is no different. The words of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but the lips of a fool shall swallow him up. The words of his mouth begin with foolishness, and the end of his talk is raving madness. A fool also multiplies words. No man knows what is to be. Who can tell him what will be after him? The labor of fools wearies them, for they do not even know how to go to the city. When the Bible says these people, they don't even know how to go to the city. That's an old expression in the Bible. It just means, we might say it this way around here. He talks a big talk, but he doesn't even know when to come in from the rain. When people say that, he doesn't even know to come in out of the rain. It means he doesn't have the sense to come in when the water's pouring out of the sky. And that's what this phrase here means. they don't even know how to go into the city. It just basically means like the same idea right there. What it's warning us about right here is not to be friends with big mouths. I'm going to read verse 11 again. A serpent may bite when it is not charmed. The babbler is no different. What it's saying here, it can seem kind of cool to be friends with a big mouth, like a big talker, because you know what? If they like you, they're going to say lots of nice things about you. They're going to promote you to other people. They might have a lot of influence. And so someone who's a big mouth, I mean, it's good, it feels good to be their friend. If you've charmed them, if they like you, then they're going to want to say nice things about you, and that'll be beneficial to you, it'll seem like. The Bible is saying here, be careful about being friends with someone like that, because someone who's like that, if they aren't charmed by you, there's no telling what they'll go say about you. They're called big mouths, babblers, big talkers. God compares talking to them, being friends with a babbler, he says it's like being a snake charmer. You guys have seen snake charmers on TV probably.
No.
It's these people who like play music on a little flute, and the snake comes up out of the basket.
Yep.
And if the snake likes the song, it's all friendly to the snake charmer. Well, the Bible says when you are friends with the babbler, it's like trying to be a snake charmer. You're kind of putting a lot of risk out there for not very much reward. There's not a whole lot of reward to being friends with a snake. Like, do you think that God looks at someone who's a snake charmer and says, wow, that's a wise job to have. That's a wise profession. Do you think that God thinks very highly of a snake charmer?
No.
Yeah, probably not. It's not really that smart whenever you think about it. A lot of risk, not very much reward for being friends with a snake. And that's actually what God thinks about being friends with a babbler, with big mouths. It's just taking a risk, a useless risk, by trying to appease them. Verse 16, we're almost at the end of the chapter. Verse 16, woe to you, O land, when your king is a child, and your princes feast in the morning. Blessed are you, O land, when your king is the son of nobles, and your princes feast at the proper time, for strength and not for drunkenness. It's saying here, a foolish leader is someone, he gets up in the morning, immediately starts to party or to act like a kid, just because he can. It says when you have a leader like that, the whole nation is going to suffer. The wise leader knows to feast at an appropriate time. And, you might do that to rejuvenate, not just to get wild and go crazy, but just to kind of like rejuvenate your people. So we do need to pray for the leaders of our country to have wisdom. And that's something I've actually been trying to do a lot with the new presidents we have. And I wish I had, I did pray for Obama to have wisdom a lot, President Obama. But apparently it didn't work. I'm just kidding. But you know what? I did pray for him, but I wish I had prayed more for him. And so I'm going to try to pray more for the current president. We should try to always pray more and more for our leaders. Not just the president, but all the people who are leaders over us. Okay, let's finish up the chapter. Verse 18, because of laziness, the building decays, and through idleness of hands, the house leaks. A feast is made for laughter, and wine makes merry, but money answers everything. Do not curse the king even in your thought. Do not curse the rich even in your bedroom. For a bird of the air may carry your voice, and a bird in flight may tell the matter. Have you ever heard the phrase when someone says, a little birdie told me?
I see that.
Yeah, that phrase actually comes from right here in the Bible. When it says, a little bird may tell the matter. It means if you say something to someone, if someone overhears that, they might just go spread the word about what you said. So what the Bible's telling us right here, don't just don't say things that you shouldn't say, or do things that you shouldn't do, even if you're in private. The Bible says even if you're in private, someone could hear about it, or someone, you think you tell someone something secretly and they go blab it everywhere. Whatever you do in private, still act righteously even whenever you're alone, whenever you're in private, because a little birdie might find out what you've done and try to spread it around about people. It's a good rule of thumb. I tried to kind of practice this in college, where if I start talking about someone in a negative way, only say things that you would be comfortable saying if they were right there in the room with you. Sometimes we do have to speak about someone negatively. We do it because people do negative things. People do bad things. So sometimes we do have to talk about that. But whatever you say it so that if they were right there in the room with you, you're just being factual about what you say. You're not exaggerating or running them down. Don't do it unless you have to, like say something negative about someone. It's unavoidable sometimes, though. If I'm at work and if I'm saying something that I dislike about, what one of the bosses said we had to do or something like that, I say it so that if the boss was to walk around the corner right then as I was talking about it, I'm not just like going, oh, and the boss said this, this was the stupidest rule I ever heard. I'm not saying it like that. I'm saying it like, this is what he said. So listen, be careful what you say. I'm trying to finish up real quick. I want to be done right now. As a youth pastor, I've said things to people before, and then literally a day later, someone was calling me up and saying, I heard you said blah, 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 blah. And I thought the person I was talking to, it was just between me and them. But apparently it wasn't. Someone else overheard it, or they went and told someone else. So a day later, someone's calling up, they're like, I heard you say that I was lazy or something like that. And you know what? Then I've just had to own my words and say, well, yeah, you were being lazy. You have got to own your words then and be like, hey, okay, I did say that you were lazy. It's because you didn't do this, and I thought you were being lazy not to do that. Whenever you say something about someone behind their back, be ready to own your words. Don't say something unless you're willing to own it, because that really will come up from time to time. Don't lie and be like, I never said you were lazy. That's ridiculous. I was exaggerated by what people said about me. You know what? If you said it, just own up to it. But don't say things you don't want to own up to. So, that will actually come up in life sometimes. Own your words, speak the truth, and just don't say something you're not willing to own. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and let us go for today. This was an extra long metamorphosis, and I realized that. Thank you guys for being here at it, though. Next one is going to be on one of the losers of the Bible.
Which one?
Well, we've talked about two of them already. The first loser we talked about was the scoffer. The second one we talked about was the simple. And so next time we are going to talk about the moron.
The moron?
Yes.
You're not supposed to say that word.
Well, it's actually a word from the Bible. That is what we're going to be talking about at the next metamorphosis. So I hope you guys can be there. It will not be for about 3 or 4 weeks. It's going to be a while before we can do another.